I never thought giving up my future would mean erasing my existence. But that's exactly what happened. I was 19 when I gave up college, so my younger brother Jason could go instead. Our family didn't have much, just enough savings for one tuition, one dream, one shot. And somehow, that shot was never meant to be mine. Jason was the golden child, brilliant, charming, with that easy smile everyone adored. Me? I was quiet, studious, the kind of girl teachers loved, but families forgot. I'd already been accepted into a good state university. I even had my course schedule printed out. But one evening, as I was finishing the dishes, Mom sat down across from me and said gently, "Sweetheart, maybe it makes more sense if you wait a while. Just a year. Let Jason go first. He's got more potential." Her voice was soft, almost kind, but I heard what she meant. Jason mattered more. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I nodded, and that was it. I started working at a local dry cleaner the next week. Early mornings, late nights, tired hands. Jason thanked me once, maybe twice, but I believed it was worth it. I thought, truly thought, that my sacrifice would mean something. He left for college with a new laptop, a suitcase full of clothes I had helped buy, and a wave that barely lasted 3 seconds. I watched the car disappear down the road and told myself this was what love looked like. This was family. The first few months, he called often, told me about classes, dorm life, new friends. I sent him money from every paycheck. Books, lab fees, a bus ticket home, whatever he needed. I skipped meals just to afford it sometimes. Never once did I say no. But slowly, the calls stopped. The texts came less and less. When I did hear from him, his replies were clipped, cold, like I was just someone he had to tolerate. When I mentioned it to Mom, she sighed. "He's busy, honey. Don't take it personally." So I didn't. I just kept sending money. Until one day, I decided to surprise him. I had a few days off and thought, why not? I cooked his favorite chicken casserole, packed it up with some snacks and little things from home, and caught a bus to his campus. I didn't call ahead. I wanted it to be a sweet moment, the kind we'd both remember. I waited outside his dorm, calling his phone over and over. No answer. After an hour, I asked a student coming out if she knew him. She blinked. "Oh." Jason said not to let anyone in unless he gave the okay. He mentioned someone from his old neighborhood might show up. Said she was kind of clingy. "You're not her, are you?" I just stood there, right there, under the blazing sun, holding a bag of food now growing cold. I realized something I hadn't dared to believe. Jason was ashamed of me. I went home that evening. Didn't tell anyone what had happened. Still sent him money the next week. But I stopped calling. I wanted to see if he'd notice. A month passed. Then 2. Then a year. Nothing. He graduated with honors. I wasn't invited to the ceremony. But Mom threw a huge party. Streamers, champagne, relatives from out of state. His diploma was framed and hung over the mantel. I cut fruit in the kitchen, while everyone toasted, the pride of the family. No one said my name. Not once. I didn't cry. A few months later, Mom called me at work. "Jason's getting married," she said. "Can you take a few days off to help us prepare?" I paused. "Jason's getting married? He didn't tell you?" she asked, like she just realized something inconvenient. "Well, you and him haven't really been close these past few years, right?" "Not close." That's what she said. The same boy I gave up everything for, who used to fall asleep on my lap when he was scared of thunderstorms, who I supported in silence through every class, every exam, every celebration that I wasn't a part of. Now I was just not close. I went to the wedding anyway. I thought, Maybe he just forgot to reach out. Maybe seeing me there would remind him. But at the wedding, Jason didn't even acknowledge me, didn't introduce me to his wife, didn't look my way. I stood in the back, wearing a borrowed dress, holding a paper cup of lukewarm punch. At one point, a woman walked over and asked kindly, "Are you a friend of the bride or the groom?" I smiled. "I'm Jason's sister." Her eyes widened. "Really? Oh, wow. He's never mentioned having a sister." I looked across the room and saw him laughing with his friends, arm around our parents, radiant in his tuxedo, like nothing in the world had ever touched him, like I didn't exist. I left the reception early. No one noticed. The next day, I returned to work as if nothing had happened. Folded shirts, scrubbed stains, smiled at customers. But inside, something had changed. I stopped checking my phone for messages from him. Stopped hoping that maybe this week, maybe this time, I'd see his name pop up on the screen. Weeks passed, then months. I started saving again. Not for Jason, not for anyone else. Just for me. At first, it felt strange, even selfish. But slowly, I began to understand what it meant to keep something for myself. Then, one afternoon, I ran into a woman at the grocery store. She was standing by the deli, struggling with her cart. I offered to help, and she smiled. "You're Jason's sister, right? I saw your photo once, back when he first started college." My stomach twisted. "Yes," I said cautiously. She laughed a little. "Small world. My daughter went to school with him. She told me he landed some fancy job in tech, moved into a huge place in Seattle. You must be so proud." I nodded, said nothing. She continued, casually. "Funny, though. She said he told people his parents were both engineers and that he was an only child." I didn't respond. I just stared at the rotisserie chickens, slowly spinning behind the glass. Only child. It shouldn't have surprised me. But hearing it out loud, from a stranger, was like being shoved under cold water. My breath caught, but I kept my face calm. I went home that night and sat in my tiny kitchen, surrounded by old bills, worn-out furniture, and silence. I stared at the photo on the fridge, one of the last we ever took together. Both of us sitting on the front porch, sun in our eyes, the future wide open. I took it down. I didn't throw it away, not yet. But I couldn't look at it anymore. Not long after, Mom called me again. "Your brother's moving," she said. "Can you help him pack?" I asked. "Did he ask for me to help?" There was a pause. "Well, not exactly. But I thought maybe if you showed up, it might remind him." Remind him. Like I was a childhood toy he'd forgotten in the attic. I said no. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel guilty. But it didn't stop there. A few weeks later, Mom called again. "Jason and his wife are expecting. Isn't that wonderful?" I said. "Congratulations." Then she added, casually, like it meant nothing, "They'll need help with the nursery. And you're so good with your hands. I told them you'd be happy to come up and paint." I was quiet for a moment. Then I said, "Mom, I'm not part of Jason's life anymore. He made that clear." There was a long silence on the other end. Then she said, with a voice colder than I'd ever heard, "You've changed." And maybe I had, because I didn't offer to explain myself. I didn't cry. I didn't say I gave up everything for him. I just said goodbye and hung up. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. I thought about every little moment, every dollar sent, every favor done, every time I said yes when I should have said no. And I thought, what if I had never said yes that first time? Would I have been the one living in the city? Would I have been the one with the degree, the job, the house, the baby, on the way? Would I have mattered more? But regrets are like shadows. They stretch behind you, quiet and long, always just a few steps out of reach. I couldn't go back, but I could move forward. I started doing small things for myself. Bought a bookshelf, got a library card, applied for night classes at the community college. I didn't tell anyone. It felt sacred. One morning, while getting ready for work, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I hesitated, then answered. "Hi," a woman's voice said. "This is Emily. I'm Jason's wife." I froze. My grip tightened around the phone. She continued. "I know we haven't met, but I wanted to ask if you'd be willing to help us. Jason's company is downsizing. Things are tight, and with the baby coming," she paused. "I heard you used to help him a lot. I thought maybe you'd want to again." There was no apology, no acknowledgement, just assumption that I was still the same girl, the one who gave without question, the one who disappeared when no longer needed. But I wasn't that girl anymore. So I said, softly, clearly, "Tell Jason congratulations, but I'm not available." Then I hung up. My hands were shaking, but I felt taller, stronger. I looked in the mirror, into the eyes of someone I was just beginning to recognize. Someone who had learned, slowly, painfully, that love without respect is not love at all. The next day, I sat on the bus to work, watching the city pass by through the smudged window. People in suits hurried across intersections. Mothers pushed strollers. Teenagers laughed with their headphones in. And I sat quietly, alone, in a seat that vibrated with every turn of the wheels, thinking about how many years I had lived without really living at all. That weekend, I walked past a small bookstore I must have passed 100 times before, but never entered. This time, I did. I ran my fingers along the spines of novels, picked one at random, and sat in a corner chair to read. I lost track of time. Hours slipped away unnoticed. No one asked anything of me. No one needed saving. I was just there, and it was enough. I started doing that every Sunday. It became my ritual. I didn't tell anyone, not because I was hiding, but because I didn't owe anyone that piece of joy. It was mine. One evening after class, I checked my phone and saw a voicemail from my mother. I stood outside the building, backpack slung over one shoulder, chilled by the evening air. Her voice came through, tight and sharp. "Jason's been asking about you. He said he wants to talk. Says maybe things got a little complicated. I think you should hear him out." Complicated. That word again. As if what happened was a misunderstanding, a scheduling conflict, something you patch over with a polite smile. I didn't call back. I needed more than words, more than half-baked guilt dressed up as reconciliation. 2 days later, Jason showed up at the dry cleaner. I hadn't seen him in nearly 4 years. He looked the same. Neat haircut, crisp shirt, watch that probably cost more than my rent. He smiled, like it was no big deal. "Hey," he said casually, like we'd just bumped into each other at the grocery store. I didn't say anything. He glanced around, then lowered his voice. "Look, I know things have been weird. I should have called, should have kept in touch." He didn't look sorry. He looked nervous, like someone rehearsing a line he wasn't sure would land. "I heard you're taking classes," he added. "That's cool. I always knew you were smart." I crossed my arms. "Why are you here, Jason?" He hesitated, then said, "I just thought maybe we could start over, as if we were kids again, playing tag in the front yard, as if everything in between, the years, the silence, the erasure, was a page we could simply turn." I gave him a long look, and then I said, "Do you remember the day I came to visit you at school? The food I brought? The way your roommate said I wasn't welcome?" His face went pale. I kept my voice steady. You didn't come down. You didn't even text. You let me stand outside like a stranger. I didn't mean. You told people you were an only child. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. I was never asking for much, I said. Just a little acknowledgement. A thank you. A phone call on my birthday. You couldn't even give me that. He shifted on his feet. I didn't know how to fix it. Then don't pretend to now. He looked hurt, and for a moment, I almost softened. But then I remembered every time I waited for a message that never came. Every dollar sent, every quiet moment of erasure. So I walked past him, into the back room. He didn't follow. When I came out later, he was gone. I thought I'd feel angry, vindicated, triumphant maybe. But all I felt was empty. Not sad, just quiet. That night, I sat in my apartment, eating leftover soup, in the television humming low in the background. I didn't cry. I didn't replay the conversation. I just sat in the stillness, letting it settle around me like dust. Sometimes closure doesn't come with fireworks or apologies. Sometimes it comes when you realize you don't need either. Weeks passed. I didn't hear from Jason again, but I kept going to class. I kept reading on Sundays. I saved enough to buy a secondhand laptop and started writing. Not for anyone else, just for me. Short stories, memories, little moments I thought were lost. One evening, I wrote about the first time I ever read to Jason, when he was 5 and too scared to fall asleep, alone. I remembered his tiny hands, gripping my arm, the way he asked me to read just one more page. I wrote until my eyes blurred. I didn't hate him. I didn't even blame him anymore. But I knew now I would never shrink myself again for someone who refused to see me. That winter, the power went out in my building for almost 2 days. No heat, no hot water, no working stove. I lit candles, wrapped myself in every blanket I owned, and huddled near the window, watching the snow fall like quiet ash. Outside, everything looked soft and beautiful. Inside, it was cold, still, and almost peaceful. I didn't call anyone. I didn't need to. A neighbor came by with a thermos of coffee. She knocked gently, as if she knew I wasn't used to visitors. I invited her in, and we sat on the floor, sipping in silence, passing the time with stories about nothing. She worked night shifts at a hospital, had 3 kids, asked me what I did, and when I said I worked at a cleaner and was taking night classes, she smiled like it meant something. That night, when I was alone again, I realized it had been a long time since anyone had just seen me. Not as someone's daughter, not as the girl who gave up college, not as Jason's sister, just me. I held on to that. Spring came, the air warmed. I planted a few flowers in the pots outside my window. Nothing fancy, just marigolds and lavender. Every morning I checked on them before work, watered them, watched them bloom. There was something quiet and defiant in that, in growing something small, just for the joy of watching it live. One day I came home to find a letter taped to my door. No envelope, just a folded piece of paper with my name written in Jason's handwriting. I didn't open it right away. I left it on the counter while I made tea, sat on the couch, let the kettle scream before I turned it off. Then finally, I opened it. It wasn't long. He wrote that he was sorry, that he'd been selfish, that he had no excuses, only regrets. He said he realized too late what I'd done for him, and that nothing he could say would be enough. But he hoped someday, somehow, I'd find a way to forgive him. I read it twice, then once more. Then I folded it neatly and placed it in the drawer with my rent receipts and class notes. I didn't cry. I didn't respond. Forgiveness, I was learning, wasn't always a door you opened for someone else. Sometimes it was the key you used to unlock your own cage. A few days later, I passed by a community board at the college and saw a flyer asking for part-time tutors. English, basic writing, reading comprehension. I took a photo of it. That night, I applied. The interview was short. The woman in charge, gray-haired, warm, the kind of presence that makes you feel safe without trying, asked me why I wanted to help. I hesitated, then said, "Because someone once gave up on me, and I know how that feels." She nodded, said nothing, just handed me a schedule and told me to show up Tuesday at 6. And I did. At first, I was nervous. I didn't know if I could help anyone. But the students, older women, single dads, immigrants, people trying to finish what they started years ago, reminded me of myself. Each of them carried something heavy behind their eyes. And yet, they showed up. Week after week, they showed up. So I did too. And slowly, I began to feel something I hadn't felt in years. Purpose. Not borrowed purpose. Not sacrifice dressed up as virtue. Real, solid purpose that belonged to me. That summer, I passed my final exams with the highest score in my class. I didn't tell anyone in my family. I bought myself a cupcake with too much frosting, sat on the fire escape under the stars, and ate it alone. And I was happy, truly, quietly happy. It wasn't a grand success. There was no crowd, no confetti, just me, my little flower pots, and a cupcake. But it felt right. It felt earned. One day, while folding laundry at the cleaners, I heard someone say my name. I turned. It was Jason's wife, Emily. She looked different than I remembered. Tired, thinner, older somehow. She held a toddler on her hip, a little girl with bright eyes and a runny nose. "I didn't think I'd see you here," she said. I shrugged. "This is where I've always been." She shifted the baby and said, "Jason's out of town. Work. Things have been hard." I waited. "I shouldn't have called you before," she said. "I didn't know the history. I don't know what I thought." I nodded. "It's okay. I just came to say thank you," she added. "I found some of the old receipts from his tuition. Your name was on all of them." She looked at me then, really looked. "You saved him," she said softly, even if he never said it. I didn't respond, because I wasn't sure if it mattered anymore. She left. The little girl waved goodbye with one sticky hand. And I stood there, holding a damp shirt, the hum of machines behind me, wondering how many lives we touch, without ever knowing what we left behind. That night, I didn't sleep, not because I was upset, not because her words stirred something painful, but because, for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel invisible. Someone had seen what I did. Someone had said it out loud. I lay awake, listening to the city breathe through the cracks in the window, thinking about all the versions of me that had come and gone. The girl who had hope, the woman who gave it away, the shadow who watched her own life shrink into silence. And now, someone new, someone still quiet, still scarred, but no longer asleep. The next morning, I got up early. I made coffee and sat on the floor beside the window, watching the light move across the wall. I opened my notebook and wrote 5 words. This life is still mine. I didn't know what would come next, but I knew I wasn't going back. That same week, I got a message from my old supervisor at the cleaner. She was retiring and asked if I wanted to take over. Part-time at first. She knew I was still in school, but with enough hours to build towards something bigger. I didn't hesitate. I said yes. I wasn't chasing anyone's dream anymore. I was building my own. I worked during the day, tutored at night, and spent weekends at the library. I stopped checking social media, stopped waiting for missed calls. I created a quiet, steady rhythm to my days. There was no drama, no spotlight, Just honest work and small joys. On my birthday, I bought myself a used bicycle, rode it through the neighborhood with the wind in my hair like I was 10 again. No one called, not Mom, not Jason, but I didn't mind. I took myself out for dinner, ordered what I wanted, and even left a tip that made the waiter smile. That was enough. Months later, during a tutoring session, one of my students, a woman in her 50s named Carla, looked at me across the table and said, "You know, you're the only one who treats me like I'm not stupid." I blinked. "You're not stupid, Carla." She nodded slowly. "Yeah, but most people don't look at me like that, like I still have a chance." I didn't know what to say, so I just smiled, because I knew exactly what that felt like. To have people stop believing in you. To be written off before your story's even done. That night, I thought about how many second chances get wasted. Not because people don't want them, but because they don't think they deserve them. I almost became one of those people. I was one decision away. One more apology accepted. One more favor done. One more piece of myself given away. From never finding this version of me. A few weeks later, I was walking home from class when I passed a small cafe tucked between a hardware store and a laundromat. In the window was a flyer. Writer's Circle, Thursday nights. Open mic, no pressure. I almost walked past, but something made me stop. I went in, sat quietly in the back, listened as strangers read poems and stories and fragments of themselves. It was raw, beautiful, scared me a little. But by the end of the night, I had signed up for the next week. When my turn came, I read a short piece about the power going out last winter, about candles and quiet and coffee with a neighbor. I read it slowly, hands shaking, voice barely above a whisper. But when I finished, they clapped, not politely, not out of obligation. They clapped like they meant it. Afterward, a man came up to me, older, kind eyes, ink on his fingers, and said, "You have a voice people want to hear." I didn't know what to do with that. No one had ever said it to me before. I walked home under a sky full of stars, shoes wet from the rain, heart buzzing with something close to joy. When I got back to my apartment, I found another letter. No handwriting this time. Typed. Clean. Crisp. It was from Jason. He wrote that he'd been going to therapy, that his marriage was falling apart, that he'd been replaying everything, the choices, the silence, the lies. He said he'd been wrong, that he didn't expect forgiveness, only hoped I'd read his words. There was a line at the end that stayed with me. "You were the better sibling." I just didn't know it until I'd already broken too much. I folded the letter, placed it in the same drawer with the first one. Then I stood at the window, looking out at the street, and whispered, I was never trying to be better. I was just trying to matter. And now, finally, I did. Not to him, not to our parents, but to myself. The thing no one tells you about healing is how quiet it is. It doesn't come with a big announcement or some sudden epiphany. It comes slowly, in ordinary moments, when you laugh without feeling guilty, when you say no without flinching, when you stop needing someone else to say you matter. That fall, I got promoted to manager at the dry cleaner. It wasn't glamorous, no raise worth bragging about. But the owner handed me the keys and said, "You're the only one I trust to run this place like it should be," and that meant something. I started coming in early, rearranging the storage room, fixing the register that jammed every other day. I trained the high school kids after class, gave them extra breaks when they looked worn out. It felt good to be the kind of person I never had. Someone who noticed, someone who made room. One Saturday afternoon, a customer came in with a familiar name on her ticket. Jason Callahan. My fingers hesitated. She saw my face and smiled. That's my brother-in-law. He's helping with our taxes. Always buried in numbers, that one. I nodded politely. Didn't say a word. When she left, I stood behind the counter, hands pressed flat. Breath slow and even. That was the moment I realized I didn't hate him. I didn't love him either. I just didn't feel anything. And that was freedom. I went home that night and opened my old box of college papers, syllabi, essays, a worn-out spiral notebook filled with to-do lists from the year I never got to start. I took a deep breath, flipped through the pages, and let them go, every last one into the trash. Not because I was bitter, but because I no longer needed to prove anything to anyone. That same week, I got invited to speak at a small community event. One of the other tutors had mentioned me to the organizer, said I had a story worth sharing. I wasn't sure what I'd say, but I said yes. I wrote my story on 3 index cards, practiced it once, then tossed the cards in my coat pocket and forgot about them. When I stood in front of that microphone, I didn't read. I just talked about sacrifice, about silence, about how some people will let you carry their whole life on your back and still act like you're standing in their way. I said, I used to think love meant disappearing so someone else could shine. But now I know. If you have to go invisible to be loved, it isn't love. It's control. The room was so quiet, you could hear every breath, every shift of a chair, every held-in sigh. Afterward, a woman came up to me. She didn't say anything at first, just reached for my hand, held it tightly, and nodded. Her eyes were wet. I understood. We don't always need answers. Sometimes we just need someone to say, I see you. I hear you. You're not alone. I went home that night and wrote my first real story. Not a memory, not a wound, a beginning. It was fiction. A woman who opens a small bookstore after years of hiding from the world. She finds old letters in the walls, starts leaving anonymous notes in the books for strangers to find. Messages like you're allowed to start over, and you matter more than they ever let you believe. I stayed up all night writing. It felt like breathing for the first time in years. And when the sun came up, I smiled to myself. Not because it was perfect, but because it existed. Because I had created something out of nothing. Later that week, I received a voicemail from my mother. Her voice was slower now, older, touched with something that might have been regret or maybe just weariness. She said, Jason told me you've been doing well, that you're working, studying. I didn't know. I guess I never really asked. I just thought. I don't know what I thought. There was a pause. Then she added, if you ever want to come by, I'll make that casserole you used to like. You don't have to stay long. Just come if you want. I played the message twice. Then I deleted it. Not out of anger, not even out of sadness, but because I'd learned to stop going back to places where my worth had always been a question. Some doors don't need to be slammed shut. Some just need to be left behind. I started walking every evening, just as the sun began to sink below the rooftops. The world turned gold for a little while, soft and forgiving. I'd pass old houses, crumbling porches, kids playing in the distance, the air heavy with barbecue smoke and dusk. It became my way of letting go. Each step, a kind of quiet rebellion. Against the past, against silence, against the version of me that once believed love meant becoming invisible. One night, I passed a young girl sitting alone on her front steps. She couldn't have been more than 12. Her arms were wrapped around her knees, and she looked like she was holding something in, something heavy for someone so small. I smiled as I walked by. She didn't smile back, just stared, And I thought, God, how many girls like her are out there, already learning to disappear to keep the peace? I kept walking, but I couldn't shake the image. When I got home, I pulled out my notebook and started a new story about a girl who whispers the truth into jars and buries them in her backyard because no one in her house listens. Every time someone ignores her, another jar goes into the dirt. Until one day, someone finds one, reads it, and finally hears her. I didn't even realize I was crying until the page blurred. It wasn't just her story. It was mine. It was all the versions of me I'd hidden for years. And slowly, those stories, one after another, became a pile. I started typing them, cleaning them up, saving them in neat little folders with names like Things I Couldn't Say Out Loud and Letters to the Girl I Was. It didn't matter if no one ever read them. The act of writing them was enough. But one day, while shelving books at the community center, Carla, the student who once told me I was the only person who treated her like she wasn't stupid, asked if I'd ever considered publishing. I laughed. Oh no, these stories are just for me. She tilted her head. That's a shame. I think other people might need them too. I didn't answer, but that night, I uploaded one of them anonymously to an online forum, just to see. It was a story about a woman who shows up to her brother's wedding, only to realize the groom has erased her from his life. She doesn't make a scene. She doesn't cry. She just walks away and starts over. The next morning, there were hundreds of comments, some angry, some heartbroken, some whispering things like, I thought I was the only one. I lived this too. Thank you for saying it. And suddenly, I wasn't alone anymore. I had found something. Or maybe I'd finally let something find me. Over the next few months, I posted more. Each story was another thread, tying me to strangers who had once felt just as forgotten. And in those quiet, glowing screens, I saw echoes of my pain, and also proof of how far I'd come. I received a message from a woman named Claire. She was in her 60s, living alone, recently divorced, after decades of being overlooked. She said my stories gave her courage to apply for a job she thought she was too old to deserve. She got it. She wrote me again just to say, "You helped me remember who I used to be." That message sat with me for days. I thought about how many years I had tried to make myself smaller, thinking that would make me worthy of love. How many times I had mistaken being useful for being wanted. And now, here I was, not being useful, not being quiet. And still, someone had found value in my voice. One evening, I took the long way home after tutoring. I passed a bookstore I hadn't noticed before. There was a sign in the window. Local Authors Night. Submissions. Welcome. Something in me paused. For the first time, I didn't look away. I walked in, fingers curled around the little USB drive in my coat pocket, the one that held every story I'd written, every scar I had stitched into sentences. And I thought, maybe it's time, not to be seen through someone else's lens, but to be known on my own terms, because I was no longer the sister in the shadows. I was the author now, of the story, of the ending, of myself. The submission guidelines were printed on a sheet of paper, taped beside the counter. Simple, straightforward, a short bio, a brief description, and the story. I stood there, holding it, heart thudding loud enough I was sure the woman behind the register could hear. Her name tag said Tina. She had gray streaks in her hair and a smile that looked like it came from a place of deep knowing. "You thinking about submitting?" she asked gently. I nodded. She smiled wider. "Good. We need more voices that don't sound like everybody else." That sentence stayed with me for days. I went home and opened the document one last time. Read it through with steady breath and still hands. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. All of it. Every line a step away from silence. Every paragraph a refusal to disappear. I submitted it. Didn't tell anyone. Not even the students at the center. Not Carla. Not the barista who always remembered my name. Not the neighbor who watered my plants when I worked late. It felt like something too sacred to speak out loud. Weeks passed. I kept living my life. Kept walking in the evenings. Kept tutoring. Kept managing the shop. I even started saving up for a little trip. Nothing big. Just a train ride up the coast. A few nights near the water. A small escape that didn't require permission or apology. And then, one Tuesday afternoon, I got the email. They'd accepted my story. It would be read aloud at the local author's night. Printed in a small booklet, sold at the event. No money, just recognition. Just a room full of people hearing the words I used to be too scared to say. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I clicked reply, typed thank you, and hit send before I could change my mind. When the night came, I dressed simply. Black blouse, clean jeans, hair tied back. I didn't want to be noticed for how I looked. I just wanted the words to do their work. The bookstore was warm, with yellow lights and the scent of paper and coffee. People milled around, holding plastic cups of wine, browsing shelves, chatting in soft voices. When my name was called, my legs felt like they didn't belong to me. But I walked to the front, picked up the mic, and read. I didn't look up much. I focused on the page, on the rhythm of the sentences I had once whispered into the dark. But when I reached the last line, and she realized, finally, she didn't need to be chosen to be whole, I let my eyes rise. The room was still. A man in the back was crying quietly. A woman near the front had her hands clasped to her mouth. And somewhere, off to the side, Tina gave me a single nod. That was all. I stepped down, heart racing, and returned to my seat. Afterward, people came up. Some said thank you. Some just touched my arm. One woman simply whispered, "That was me." And I believed her, because these stories, mine, theirs, were never just about one family, or one brother, or one night. They were about all the ways women vanish in plain sight, all the ways they come back. After the reading, I walked home alone. The sky was wide and open, stars scattered like seeds. I breathed deeply, felt something in my chest uncoil. Not pride, exactly. Not relief. Just peace. I didn't need validation anymore, but I had earned it anyway. Later that week, Carla brought me a small gift. A coffee mug with the words, "Say it anyway," printed in shaky gold script. She handed it to me without explanation, and I understood. Because there will always be people who won't hear you, won't see you, won't value the cost of what you gave up. But there will also be others, sometimes strangers, sometimes reflections of who you used to be, who will hear the tremble in your voice and say, "I know," and that knowing is enough. The past hadn't changed. Jason hadn't become a hero. My parents hadn't rewritten the years. But I was no longer waiting for any of them to understand what they'd lost, because I had finally found what I had almost forgotten existed, a life of my own. A few days after the reading, I walked past a mirror in a coffee shop. Not a quick glance. Not the kind where you check your hair or smooth your shirt. I looked, really looked, and for the first time, I saw a woman I recognized. Not the girl who gave everything away. Not the sister who waited for thanks that never came. Not the daughter who learned to stay silent so others could sleep easy. This woman had scars, yes, but she also had her name back, her voice, her shape, her own reflection. I smiled at her. It was a small, tired smile, but it was real. That weekend, I took the train north. No plans, no itinerary, no one to impress. I brought a notebook and a secondhand camera. I sat by the window, watching the world rush by. Trees in blur, towns I didn't know the names of, strangers staring into their own quiet. When I reached the coast, I walked straight to the edge of the water and let the wind hit me full in the face. It was sharp and cold and perfect. I stood there, toes just barely grazing the foam, and whispered to no one. I made it, not with fireworks, not with revenge, not with some grand moment of recognition from the people who once forgot I existed. No, I made it by staying, by surviving what tried to erase me, by choosing every day not to go back, back to guilt, back to silence, back to giving everything away in exchange for crumbs of love. I stayed 2 nights in a tiny room above a bakery, woke up early, walked the beach at sunrise, wrote with numb fingers, ate warm pastries, talked to no one. It was the happiest I'd been in years. On the second morning, I got a call from the tutoring center. Carla had passed her final test. She was officially ready for her GED exam. The woman on the phone said Carla cried when she saw her results. She wanted you to know, she said. Said you were the reason she didn't give up. I hung up and cried too, not from sadness, but from the strange, tender ache of being useful in a way that didn't cost me myself. Later that evening, I stopped by a little bookstore by the water, the kind where the shelves lean and the floor creaks, and everything smells like salt and wood and old ink. I found a novel I'd read years ago, one I loved before I started shrinking. I bought it, wrote a note on the inside cover for the next woman who forgets her own voice. Keep reading. Keep writing. You're still here. That means everything. Then I tucked it onto a random shelf and walked away. I didn't leave my name because it wasn't about being known. It was about making space. The kind no one ever made for me. On the last night of the trip, I stood on the balcony of that little room, wrapped in a blanket, staring at the dark sea. I thought about Jason, about our parents, about the girl I used to be. And I didn't feel bitter, just older, wiser, free. Not everything can be repaired. Some relationships will always stay broken, but not every ending is a failure. Some endings are release. Some endings are the beginning of you. The train ride home felt different. I wasn't rushing back to anything. Not to please, not to fix, not to explain. My life waited for me, sure, but it no longer demanded my proof of worth. It simply was mine, quiet, steady, earned. Back at the cleaner, the scent of starch and warm cotton greeted me like an old friend. The machines hummed. The kids I trained asked me about the trip. I smiled, said it was peaceful, and left it at that. They didn't need the full story. Sometimes healing isn't something you explain. Sometimes it's just something you wear, like a second skin. Invisible, but undeniable. That night, as I locked up and turned off the lights, I paused at the counter. There was a receipt someone had left behind. A simple white slip with the name Callahan scribbled at the top. I didn't flinch. I just folded it, left it in the pickup basket, and walked out into the street like it meant nothing. Because it did. Nothing. A few months passed. Then, one Saturday morning, I got an envelope in the mail. Handwritten. No return address. Inside was a wedding invitation. Jason's daughter, the one I met years ago, sticky and squirming in Emily's arms, was getting married. The card was cream-colored, elegant. My name was printed clearly on the envelope, like it belonged there. I sat on the couch holding it in my lap, unmoving. There was a note inside. She asked about you. I didn't know what to say, but I told her the truth. Her aunt saved my life, even when I didn't deserve it. I hope you'll come, even just for her. I read it once, then again, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel anger, or sorrow, or longing. I just felt still. I didn't RSVP, but I wrote the girl a letter. I told her I hoped her marriage would be one where both people are allowed to be whole. I told her to protect her voice, to speak even when her hands shake, to never shrink for someone else's comfort. I told her love should never cost you your name. I signed it simply, Aunt Lily. Then I mailed it. No return address, no expectation. Just words sent out into the world like a message in a bottle. Weeks later, a package arrived. Inside was a small book, a collection of short stories from new writers. My story was in it, page 37, titled The Space She Made. I held it close for a long time, not because it was proof, but because it was a reminder. I had taken everything they said would ruin me, the silence, the dismissal, the years of invisibility, and I turned it into a voice, one that no longer needed permission to speak. I lit a candle that night, sat by the window with the book in my lap and the city blinking outside, alive and loud. And I whispered, just to myself, this is not a happy ending. It wasn't. It was better. It was mine.